Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. The topic of this lesson will be surprising early queen moves. As you know, generally, it's not recommendable to get your queen out too early in the game prior to completing the development of the rest of your army, especially, of course, I'm referring to the minor pieces, and castling. However, there are situations when indeed that early queen move can lead to a significant gain or even checkmate. Let's see some of these examples. The first game is a French defense, which started as a French e4, e6, d4, d5, the standard opening moves of the French, and now White needs to react to Black's last move, which not only occupied the center but immediately attacked White's pawn on e4. White has numerous ways to respond to that by simply advancing the pawn or trading the pawns or protecting it. The most common ways are to protect the pawn with the knight, either from d2 or from c3. In this game, White chose to protect the pawn from d2. So now if pawn takes pawn, knight captures back. And in this junction, Black has four main moves that are often played. They are either knight f6, knight c6, pawn takes pawn on e4, or as Black continued in the game, playing c5. The legendary Viktor Korchnoi used to love this opening and had very many successful games with it. White captured on d5, and this is one of those situations when capturing back with the queen is certainly a reasonable choice. The reason being that White already committed his knight to d2 and therefore cannot develop it to c3 to attack Black's queen if it would show up on d5. But this game continued differently, and Black captured back with the pawn. And right now, White made a little bit of a premature choice in trading the pawns on c5. More common and better considered is to first just develop the knight to f3 or give a check with the bishop on b5. The reason why it's more accurate to delay the trade on c5, because generally after either of those continuations, Black sooner than later will end up developing the bishop from f8 to d6 or e7, when White would capture already on c5, and that would mean that the Black bishop would end up getting to c5 to recapture White's pawn in 2 moves instead of 1. So after the immediate trade on c5, the Black bishop gets out in just 1 movement without first stopping on e7 or d6. In these type of situations, when Black has an isolated middle pawn on d5, the general idea for White is to try to get a knight to blockade the d5 square. In such situations, the general idea for White is to try to get one of his knights to d4 to blockade Black's isolated pawn. White made a move in that direction, however, it turned out to be a devastating error. White in this position could continue, for example, knight f3 followed by knight b3 with a normal game. The mistake that White made was playing knight e2. It kind of looks a bit passive and surrounding the White king. Of course, White's idea is then on the next move to play knight to f3, and then indeed one of the knights could end up nicely on d4. The problem is there was no time for that. And I suggest you take a little bit of time and figure out what is the key move right now that leads to Black's advantage at such an early stage of the game. And that key move is Queen to b6. Look at that. One of those exceptions, when indeed we are bringing the queen out early to attack. The queen and the bishop are cooperating beautifully together on the a7 g1 diagonal. Black is threatening to checkmate immediately on f2, and sadly for white, they are not ready to castle, and neither does white have any reasonable way to protect that pawn. Moving the pawn away from the attack is no help because black still checkmates with a smothered mate with bishop f2. And other than that, if white just moves the knight away, either one to make a little bit of air for the king at least to escape from the checkmate, it won't really help because, for example, after knight b3, black wins more than a pawn. After king d2, the checkmate would arrive. Very quick and short game. Make sure you don't fall in this trap. Let's see our second example. It's also a French defense, but the game continued differently on the third move. At this point, white protected the pawn on e4, also with a knight, but this time from c3. And in this situation, black has three main moves that black can choose from. One is to play bishop to b4, creating a pin over white's knight. Another one is to play knight f6 to put pressure yet another time on the pawn on e4. Or thirdly, the way black continued, the least popular of the three, and that is to trade the pawns on e4. White recaptured, and black played, developing the knight to d7. White developed his knight as well, and now came knight g8 to f6, offering the exchange of knights. Now white has a choice to indeed trade, or move the knight away, or develop his own knight on e4. All of them are certainly playable and reasonable, but in this game white chose to immediately exchange knights on f6. Now capturing back with the pawn obviously would be a bad idea because it would unnecessarily weaken the kingside position of black and ruin the pawn structure at the same time. Capturing back with the queen generally is not recommended because the queen shouldn't come out so early in the game. And just to demonstrate an example, why not? Because now if white would, let's say, play bishop d3, which would be the best choice, then black already has to be really careful, as a simple developing move such as bishop d6 would clearly be disastrous, allowing bishop g5, and boom, the black queen is trapped. Right? So that is why we do not generally like to bring the queen out early, because when we do, the queen can get in serious trouble. Let's go back. After knight f6, therefore, black answered better by recapturing with the knight. At this stage, white should certainly continue developing. My first idea would be to develop the bishop to d3, although I cannot really blame white for their choice either. Bishop g5, creating a pin immediately on that knight on f6. And black immediately unpins the knight, and white played bishop d3, developing. So far things are going in a relative normal manner without any serious mistake on either side. Black castled, and right now white made a very smart and tricky move. Played queen e2. Looks like a move that kind of just develops and gives white the option to castle either on the king or queen side. So then the two rooks would be connected. At the same time, it sets up a very nasty threat. and the queen becomes the hero of it. If black continues with b6, that's a big mistake. Why? Because it opens up the long light square diagonal, leaving black's rook on a8 unprotected. But how can white take advantage of it? Well, try to think a little bit and try to figure out this two-move operation. And the first step of it is bishop capturing knight. And regardless whether black captures back with the bishop or the pawn, the queen becomes the hero, again getting involved real early in the game by playing queen e4. And now there is a battery between the white bishop on d3 and the queen on e4. White is ready to checkmate immediately on h7. So black needs to attend to that, and whether black plays g6 right now or anything else, the rook will be fallen on a8. Or alternatively, black gets checkmated on h7. So again, white won material real early in the game using some very powerful queen moves. What's the moral of the story? Well, use your queen smartly. Let's move on again. Here we go. And now we're switching on to a king-pawn opening. Started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4. Here we are in the Guccio piano. Bishop c5. And at this stage, white has two avenues to go. Either to play in a more solid way by castling or d3 or such, or play more ambitiously and try to immediately occupy the center and gain some initiative. In this game, white did the latter by playing c3, getting ready to play d4 on the next move. Black responded with knight f6, which is the best answer, and white plays d4. And this is a key moment in this opening where black has to play accurately, not to stay behind. The correct route right now is to trade the pawns, and when white recaptures, then give an important intermediate check with the bishop. Now what happens is, if the white king moves, obviously the pawn is hanging on e4, and if knight blocks, because the knight would be in a pin after bishop b4 check, black again can capture the pawn on e4, although it leads to a lot of complications. Black is doing just fine there. And lastly, after bishop d2, even though black does not win the pawn on e4, but after trade playing d5, black reaches a very comfortable middle game. However, the game we are looking at right now continued differently. Black made a mistake and moved the bishop back to b6, allowing for white to capture the pawn on e5. And the problem was that after the black knight also captures the pawn and starts counterattacking on f2, white can do better than just castling and protecting it, namely use the queen smartly by playing queen d5. And we're having a similar pattern as we saw in the last example when the queen threatened checkmate and the rook. Right now the queen threatens checkmate and the knight. And black cannot avoid losing material. Let's see the next short little game. We're moving on now to queen-pawn games. d4, knight f6, knight f3, c4, of course, the other main alternative, e6, and white could now still choose to play c4, transposing to a Queen's Indian type of opening, but white played a more solid line by bishop g5, creating a pin on the black knight immediately and having in mind to play e4 real early using that pin over the knight. Here black has numerous common answers. Most of them are like c5 or d5 or h6, asking the bishop where to go. Our game continued differently than any of those when black played bishop e7. White played knight b to d2 with the idea to then play e4, and that explains why black played d5 right now, controlling that e4 square, making sure white doesn't end up comfortably having two center pawns on the fourth rank. White continued with e3, came knight b to d7, both sides are developing fine so far, and came bishop d3, everything normal. Black played c5, and white plays c3, a very typical move. If c5, c3. The reason being, white wants to keep his bishop of d3 on the b1 through h7 diagonal. So therefore now, if black would respond with playing c4, closing the queen side or the center part of the board, then the white bishop would have a retreat to c2, remaining on that diagonal. Black played b6, trying to get his bishop out to develop. And here white played a little strange move. It worked out in this game, but I certainly would not recommend it for white if it would be my game or one of my students' game. White played queen a4. The queen is really out of place there, but you'll see the idea that white had in mind. What black should have done right now is to actually close the position, since the queen is misplaced on a4, and then follow it up by gaining time attacking that queen that will have to go back where it came from. On the next move, after the white bishop moves, black could play a6, followed by b5, which could be a typical plan for black in such situations anyway. Black played differently and castled simply in this position, which is still not a major mistake, of course. White now started to play well and in a tricky way. White played knight e5. That knight aims to get to c6 to try to get one of black's bishop. Here black's best choice would have been to play bishop b7 to meet white's knight c6 idea by trading the light-squared bishop for the knight. That bishop, in any case, is not a very active one and not a very good one. So that should have been black's response. Instead, black traded knights, and now all of a sudden, white's queen a4 move, which didn't seem to make much sense so far, all of a sudden starts to fall into place. White, of course, just recaptured, and here black already has difficulties. The knight does not have a real good square to go to. For example, if it goes to h5, it will be trapped real quick. After the exchange of the bishops, white is ready to simply attack that very knight on h5 with the pawn, and then there is nowhere to go. Or alternatively, if the knight moves rather to e4, again white is winning material after the exchange of the bishops. White also exchanged the knights, and now the queen comes to play with queen e4 with a motif that we saw in one of the earlier games, the checkmate threat on h7 as well as the rook on a8. But you may wonder, why not simply move the knight back? Well, that's exactly what black did in the game, retreating the knight to d7. And now, all of a sudden, the queen gains its power and swings over to the other side, plays queen h4, again combining a threat of checkmate with attacking another important piece. And here, black cannot avoid either getting checkmated or losing the bishop. And let's see one more final game where the queen is the hero. And now we're moving back to another king-pawn opening, namely a Scotch defense. Knight f3, knight c6, and d4. That's the Scotch. Pawn captures, knight captures, and in this position there are three popular moves. One is bishop c5, as black played in this game. Another one is knight f6, and the third one is a little bit surprising, bringing the queen out early to h4. That's the least popular of the three. In this game, black continued with bishop c5, certainly a fine move. And now white has two options, either to trade immediately on c6, more popular nowadays, or bishop e3. Either one is well playable. Now immediately black needs to be real careful, because if black is careless, for example, develops the knight to e7, white would be ready to exchange knights immediately and then winning the bishop on c5. Therefore, black is much better off in this position playing queen f6, which is the main theoretical move right now. And the idea is that if white now would play knight c6, that would certainly be a mistake, because black would first trade the bishops on e3, ruining white's pawn structure, and only then capture the knight on c6. White didn't fall for that, but played c3, which is the best move in this position. Now white has sufficient defense on the d4 knight. And black already is safe to play knight to g7, now that the queen is already on f6. And right now white has various ways to go, but the more modern popular move is bishop to c4. Came knight e5, attacking the bishop, which had to retreat back to e2. White kind of purposefully wasted this move because they plan to play f4 real soon, chasing the knight away. Therefore, black played actively, played d5, white castled, and here black made a mistake. Black played h5, allowing knight b5. Now black is getting in trouble. The pawn on c7 is hanging with a check, and so is the bishop on c5. Black played queen b6 in hopes that now the queen protected everything. However, white has again a special queen move at hand. Trade, and now comes the key move. Very brilliant move, removing the guard of the c7 pawn. Queen d4, attacking the black queen and the black knight, and after queen trades, white simply captures back with the pawn, keeping dual threats on the black knight and the fork with knight c7. Black is losing material. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. In this rook endgame, black is the one who has an extra pawn. Yet, if white plays correctly, white is winning. Try to spend a little time and figure out the correct solution here. The answer is that white would like to promote one of his pawns. Obviously, the e-pawn is more likely, considering the fact that both the black king and rook are pretty much holding off the b-pawn. On the other hand, if white would succeed to exchange rooks, all trouble would be solved. And the answer is advancing the b-pawn ahead. Now, if king captures, everything is solved real easy. Rook b1 check, king moves away, white trade rooks on b8, and then advances the e-pawn. But how about if black captures right now with the rook instead? Well, then rook a1 check, king b8, and now a beautiful deflecting move, rook b1, ready to even give up the rook just to promote the pawn. I'm sure you can get easily convinced that if now rook takes rook and the white pawn advances to e7, there's nothing black will be able to do to prevent the white pawn from promotion. But black still has a trick, that is to play f3. Now, if white mistakenly would capture that pawn, then already after rook takes rook, pawn advances to e7, the black rook would be ready to come behind from e1 and easily win. Therefore, king f2 is the only correct answer, and now after rook captures e7, rook b2 check, king f3, rook b3 check, and king f4, black runs out of checks and can do nothing to prevent the promotion of the white pawn. Therefore, white wins. Thank you for listening, and be back next week for some more chess ideas. Bye-bye.